Scripture reading for this morning is Hebrews 11, 1 through 3. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance in what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what is visible.
Well, good morning. If you're joining us for the first time, you're an honored guest here, and we're thrilled that you're joining us. So we have been in a series, as been mentioned already, going through the better part of the year, the book of Hebrews, looking at the supremacy of Christ, that Christ is greater than everything you think you need in this life. And so we've seen, as we've gone through the book of Hebrews, that the Hebrew author, the people he's writing to, these Christians who he's writing to, that they are just weary, they're tired, and they have taken their focus off of the greatness of Jesus Christ. And they want to turn back, and they want to quit on their faith. But today we reach Hebrews 11, hence the bumper video that all of you were mesmerized by, I'm sure. And we're starting kind of what I'm calling an inline series. I don't know what else to call that, but we're still in Hebrews, but we're going to take some time to really unpack this hall of faith, because sometimes it takes the example of others going before you to help you persevere in your own faith. And that's what the Hebrew author wants to do with us this morning. So starting in chapter 10, actually, in verse 35, it starts like this. He says, "So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. For in just a little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith, and I take no pleasure in the one who shrinks back. But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved." So remember that the Hebrew audience is actually very familiar with their Old Testament, right? So they know a lot of the stories of their Old Testament. In fact, they're wanting to go back to Judaism. A lot of them are. These Jewish converts, they're probably wanting to go back to that old way of living. And what the sermon is trying to do is help them remember who they actually belong to. They don't belong to the kind of people who shrink back and go back. No, they belong to the people of the Old Testament stories who walked in faith. And he's going to remind them of those stories of these Old Testament heroes of faith, because he knows, point number one, that real faith is actually inspiring to future generations. What is it about knowing that someone has done something first that helps others have the courage to do it too? You know, before Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, they summited Mount Everest in 1953. Before they did that, did you know there were just only about a dozen attempts to do that? But none of them were successful that we know of. But then word gets around that Hillary and Tenzing, they summited Everest, and for the first time in history, people knew that it was possible. Today, do you know how many people summit Everest every year? It's around 600 to 900 people summit every year Mount Everest. Now, that's not everyone who attempts it, but that's how many actually summit now. They successfully summit Mount Everest every year. And so there's something about seeing someone else do something first that gives you the inspiration you need to keep going in the right direction. Many of you know that I hiked the through pass of the Enchantments a couple of years ago, and the answer is yes, you will be hearing about this every year, okay? Because it was hard for me to do. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done, and so you get to hear about it all the time now. So on that hike, you see some of the most beautiful things on this through pass and the enchantments, like Lake Kolchak. Oh man, isn't that beautiful? Isn't that pretty? It's like green. It's just the picture does it no justice, right? And you have Cooper Warpula there looking at it. He was one of our buddies that went up with me. But you see that lake and a lot of beautiful other things. We had to hike up Asgard's Pass, and that's about 7,800 feet in elevation. And after you get to the top of that, there's still another 10 miles of beautiful things that you can never really see on these hikes around here. It's just amazing, gorgeous things, snow lakes to rivers to forests and all this thing. But about the time we got to the top of that and I found out we still had 10 miles left in this hike, I said to my friends helping me up, I said, I don't want to see one more beautiful thing. I want to get off this mountain. I want to go home. And the only thing that kept me going, besides my son and these awesome friends of mine, the Warpulas, was a Yelp review. It was done by what we called the Champagne Ladies. They said that they thought they would start early in the morning and be done by dinner time drinking champagne. And they said we were wrong. They didn't get done till like 10 p.m. And so for the whole hike, I was thinking, I just got to beat the Champagne Ladies. They have no idea the inspiration they were to me that day. But we didn't beat them, actually, and I blame Rick. But we'll talk about that later. But we did finish. Anyways, the Hebrew author says this in chapter 10, verse 39. But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and were saved. And so we're going to go through this series looking at these people who had faith, and you're going to hear some stories of people who in the Hebrews word says this in chapter 11, verse 33, who through faith these people conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might again or gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins, goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in the desert and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith. Because we need to see people who have gone on before us in faith to continue walking in faith for ourselves. And maybe one day, someone may be inspired by your journey of faith. A lot of you know, I've said this story before, that when my mom died, when my dad died, my mom remarried. And I talked about this earlier in this series, how I wasn't so sure that was a good idea as a little kid, another guy coming into our home, right? But it turned out I was wrong. She chose very well. And it also turned out that I got a new set of grandparents, which meant every Christmas and birthday I got more presents. And so that really turned out really good for me. I don't know if I've told you much about my granddaddy on my stepdad's side of the family. His name is Clark Hanna, and he was a Pan Am pilot during the golden age of flight. And he flew those clippers that you see on the screen there, and he flew them all around the world. Just a really interesting man and all the things he's done as a pilot. But on one of those flights, he, in 1961, with his wife, flew to Frankfurt, Germany, and they adopted a baby boy named Douglas, who became my stepdad. And when Granddaddy retired, he dedicated much of the rest of his life to being an elder in the Church of Christ, where I grew up in Vancouver, Washington. He might have been one of the most godly men I have ever known. Now, I just knew him as Granddaddy, and growing up as kind of a snot-nosed, spoiled grandson, One wintry afternoon when I was hanging out at their house and I was bored, I said, I want to go outside and I want to play basketball. It was cold outside, but the basketball hoop that was normally at my grandparents' house, he would put away every winter so that it wouldn't freeze and come out of the asphalt that it was in. And so he went outside and he went out in the cold and he got that pole, my granddad. And I'm watching him from the window in the nice warm house, like, oh, is he going to hurry up or what? And he gets it in there and he screws on the hoop to the pole and he's lifted that and he's boom, dunks it in there to the ground. And I went outside and I shot about 5 bank shots. They all went in, but I shot about 5 bank shots. And I was like, it's cold out here. I'm not going to stay out here and play basketball. I went inside. My grandma starts talking to me and she says, what are you doing in here? I thought you were going to go. I said, yeah, it's freezing out there. I'm not going to play basketball. And she just lit into me. She could not believe what I had just done. I made my grandfather go out. And as she is berating me for my decision, which was right, it was right for her to do that, my granddad didn't say anything. He just walked outside, pulled that pole up, unscrewed it, and put it back away. That's the kind of guy he was. As I recall, he was an elder in the church where I went to church, basically until he got too sick to do that and frail. And as an elder in the church, I don't know if all of you know this, but as an elder in the church, you have no idea how difficult their job can be. But he kept all that in confidence. And when he died in 1997, stories came out that I had never heard of before. People who he helped financially, and sometimes loans weren't repaid, but they were forgiven. He never held it against them. Another story came out that only a few people knew about because he didn't want the praise. There's this woman who had a disease of some sort where it made her legs swell, and they would swell so much that it would cause these openings and these wounds in her legs, and she had to have these bandages around her legs changed weekly. Her own children would not go into her house because of the smell and because of how gruesome the actual changing of these bandages were. And so my granddaddy went over there. Every week, he would kneel down and he'd unwrap those wounds and he would change her bandages when nobody else would. And the last story that shocked me when I was listening to this memorial was when my stepdad got up there. Child of the 60s and 70s, and, wild child a little bit, and he said these words. Can you imagine your kid not always doing what you want them to do? Do you always stay exactly in the frame of mind of Christ? I'm not sure you would. This is what my dad said. He said, I don't think I ever saw my dad sin. Can you imagine saying that about your parents at their funeral? I can't even imagine that is, I know he sinned, but nothing, a word of anger, anything? He said he never saw his dad sin. He wasn't being nostalgic, if you know my dad. He wasn't being overly dramatic. He was being serious. He couldn't remember a situation where he saw his dad sin. But what he did see was a life of Christian service and care that was modeled for him. And I think it's one of the reasons he married a widowed woman with 2 kids that had lost their daddy, and he provided them a home and a good life. And today, it is very, very difficult to outserve Doug Hanna, because real faith is inspiring to others, and it helps them continue in their own faith journeys. Secondly, his point, I think, is real faith isn't seeing everything completely. The Hebrew author doesn't give a definition of faith so much as a description of what faith does and how faith works. And so on this journey of following Jesus that we're all in, faith is imperative. You have to have faith. And so he describes faith in what might be the most famous verse in Hebrews chapter 11. It's verse 1. It says, now faith is the confidence in what we hope for, an assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. So faith in the Christian life is like a foundation of a house in some ways. Real faith is just the underlying foundation in a Christian life that gives us the confidence to believe that we will experience the promises of God that He has given us that we're hoping for. And so when a believer has faith, it actually gives them this inward conviction that God will keep His word. And therefore, they can move forward in confidence that God is going to be there for them, even when they can't see everything. And this is what the ancients were commended for, is what he says. And so, 19 times in Hebrews 11, we'll see the term by faith. By faith, Abraham obeyed and went, and by faith he lived as a stranger in the promised land. By faith, Jacob blessed Joseph's sons. By faith, Joseph spoke of the Exodus. By faith, Moses' parents hid him. By faith, Moses refused to be called Pharaoh's son. And by faith, Israel crossed the Red Sea. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell. And by faith, Rahab welcomed the spies, to name a few. The underlying motivation to do what God asked these ancient heroes to do was faith. True biblical faith, it is not blind optimism or just this manufactured hope-so feeling. That's not what faith is. Real faith is confidently obeying God's word even when you can't see past your circumstances or the consequences that are going to come ahead of you. But it's not believing in spite of any evidence either. Praise God, He actually gives us evidence of His working and His power and His existence in this world. And so Hebrews chapter 11, the author says in verse 3, by faith we also understand that the universe was formed at God's command. So that is what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Did you know that our known universe contains over 100 billion galaxies? And each one of those galaxies holds hundreds of billions of stars. And so they estimate that the universe holds over 1 billion trillion stars. Somebody write that for me. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if you can even imagine that. If you were to travel at the speed of light, you could go around our Earth 7 times a second, okay? Now, if you were to travel to the edge of the known universe at the speed of light, it would take you 28 billion years or more. I don't know who did the math on that, but that's amazing to me. At the speed of light, 28 billion years. And then you have this little planet Earth that somehow a little moon and a little star we call the sun, both of them perfectly the right distance from the earth to sustain human life. Oxygen and hydrogen at just the exact right levels, water and ocean tides and nitrogen, and we go, what an interesting coincidence that is. Or maybe you're like David, and by faith you say, what an awesome God we serve. When I consider the heavens and the work of your fingers, who is man that you are mindful of him? You see, you don't get to see everything you need for hard, concrete evidence or facts of God creating the universe, but God allows us to see enough. Faith doesn't mean that we have all of the evidence, but real faith exists, I believe, most powerfully when you risk following God and following His voice, and when you can't see everything exactly clearly and perfectly. And it's when you move in the direction of believing God and obeying God, despite not knowing what the outcome is going to be, and despite not seeing every piece of concrete evidence, that it makes God smile because of your faith. And that's the last point. Real faith is pleasing to God. We have that on the screen. And it's here that the Hebrew author brings onto stage a couple of characters from the Old Testament, Genesis chapter 4, chapter 5. He brings on stage the first murder victim and the first person to be taken straight to heaven without dying. And he writes in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4, "By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life, and so that he did not experience death, he could not be found, because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and he rewards those who earnestly seek him." And so the story, Abel, he brought a better gift than Cain. And by faith he did that, and the faith of Enoch allowed him to walk with God in a way that no one else has. And his point here, I think, is simple, but it is extremely pointed. That it is impossible, he says, to please God without faith. Those are pretty strong words, aren't they? It's impossible to please God without faith. There's a sense that maybe there's a God in the universe. Maybe you sense that. And you can have this sense that this God wants you to actually seek him. But until faith moves you in the direction of seeking and obeying God, you can't possibly please him. Whoa. I mean, those are heavy words. But they come with great encouragement, I think. Because it says God rewards those who do earnestly seek him. And so we'll see more how this plays out as we look into the stories of these heroes in the hall of faith. So what do we learn from this lesson? I think, first of all, we need to ask the question, what will your faith lead you to do? Because real faith always leads to action. What are some things in your life that maybe you've been waiting on too long because you haven't had the concrete evidence that you think you need to move in faith, or to move to do those things? Maybe you need to seek God and just take a leap of faith and do these things that God has put on your heart, like our heroes of faith did. They didn't know the outcome. Did you know that Daniel didn't know he was going to make it out of the lion den? Did you know David didn't know that Goliath wasn't going to kill him? They didn't know the outcome, but they moved in faith and belief in God. But their faith led them to act. I think some students in here, I think they have a real opportunity, some of you, to put their faith on public display when it comes to science class. At some point, if you attend a public school, whether that's high school or college, it's going to come up about the origins of the universe. And will you have the courage to say, my faith leads me to believe behind all the awesomeness of the universe is a God who loves us? Will you have the faith to say that? Will you have the faith to say, and frankly, I think it takes less faith to believe that than to believe we are all here by accident? Can you say that? And finally, I think this lesson should cause every believer who wants to have kids or who has kids, children and grandchildren, to consider the legacy you are leaving them. Will your funeral be a true celebration of your life of faith when the time comes, that inspires your grandchildren for generations to come? Or will it be just another funeral? So one last story about Granddaddy. After my Grammy passed away, there were some heirlooms that were available to us, and I typically, when that happens, I'm not really interested in a whole lot of stuff to clutter my house. I do like practical things that I can use almost all the time. And so she pulled out this drawer, my parents did, and inside one of these drawers was this, I don't know what you call it, but it's a travel grooming kit. It was my granddad's. And what I imagined him was carrying this on those clipper planes, maybe in his pocket. Maybe he got the comb out, did the hair, right? Now, I don't use any of that stuff. I just want you to know that I don't use that. There's a shoehorn. There's like a bottle opener, nail file tweezers, and some fingernail clippers. I don't really use anything in here, but I do use the fingernail clippers. And I keep this in my office. And about every 6 months, just kidding, I clip my fingernails more often than that. So about once or twice a month, I'll get this little thing out. It's just a thing. Get the fingernail clippers out. And as I do that process, I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at this travel kit, and I'm remembering in my office as a minister the life of someone who inspired me, who's passed away, and his story of faith was something and is something that keeps me going. And your story of faith one day may help your children and grandchildren keep going. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to be encouraged by Hebrews chapter 11 and the heroes of faith. And I want you to know that here at this church, if you need prayer to help sustain you in your walk of faith, we offer that this morning in the back in room 9 with our prayer team. In the front and the back with our elders, they're here to pray with you to keep your faith in Jesus Christ. If you have not yet placed your faith in Jesus, though, you can be baptized this morning. We would love to do that for you. Just come to the front when we sing our closing song. But whatever your need may be, we want to help you this morning. Please come and respond while we stand and sing this closing song. Let's stand and sing.